Hi everyone. In this video we're going to be looking at the slide of the trachea and esophagus, but for the purposes of this video we're going to be focusing on the trachea itself. What you're looking at right now is the pointer is pointing to the lumen of the trachea, and so what you're seeing here is the epithelium of that trachea, some blood vessels around the outside of that epithelium, underneath that epithelium, and this is the cartilage ring that surrounds it. So this is the front of the trachea that you're looking at right now. So this is the part that if you were to feel your neck right now, you would be looking at, you would be feeling this part right there, the cartilage ring that surrounds it. Now, this is the front, and so this cartilage, there's a bit of a lymphatic tissue there on the side. So this cartilage kind of continues around the outside edges of this trachea until you get to this point, and it kind of ends. And so we have this kind of an opening that's going to be connected or surrounded fully by some smooth muscle called the trachealis muscle. And here's the other end of this cartilage ring that's going to go all the way around the rest of this structure. More lymphatic tissue there. Okay, so here's the tracheal cartilage. Okay, some adipose tissue in front. Okay, so let's take a look at this a bit closer. So zoom in. So we're at 40x right now. Let's go up to 100x. Okay, so what we're seeing here is a slightly higher magnification of what we were just looking at. And again, we can see the epithelium. It looks like there's a lot of nuclei there. It's very basophilic. There is a layer of the lamina propria just underneath that. And then there's a submucosa, which doesn't quite look as cellular and has lots of these larger blood vessels. So these are mostly veins. Now, there's a lot of blood flow into the area because it's there to increase the temperature of the areas it's passing through. So it's to warm up the air as it is traveling towards your lungs. And then beyond that, beyond the submucosa, we have Tunica Adventitia, which contains the cartilage, and then connective tissue beyond that. So let's kind of follow this along a little bit. So I can show you some of the other structures within the Adventitia. So we have some blood vessels here. So there's an artery, a couple of veins showing up here, and that Adventitia. And then this Adventitia also becomes continuous with the Tunica Adventitia surrounding the outside of this structure here. This is the esophagus. So we can see here a stratified squamous epithelium, and then the different layers of the esophagus here. Let's try to focus on this region though here. So let's take a look at this a little bit more closely. Switch over to the 400x magnification. And so at this magnification we can start to see a little bit more of the detail of that epithelium. This is a pseudostratified columnar ciliated epithelium. It is very much unique in that it tends to show up in the respiratory system only. It's referred to quite often as a respiratory epithelium. What you can see here at the very surface is some cilia, and then beneath that we have what look like multiple layers of nuclei. Now all of these cells are actually in contact with the basement membrane, so it is actually a simple epithelium, but it looks stratified, which is why it's called a pseudostratified epithelium. Now, beneath this epithelium is the layer of lamina propria. Within this layer we're likely to find a lot of capillaries. And the epithelium here is the functional component, and so capillaries will tend to be found closest to the functional component of a particular organ. And the larger blood vessels are the ones that feed those capillaries or collect blood from those capillaries, as the case may be. So in this region here, from here to here, is the Tunica mucosa, or rather the lamina propria. So together with the epithelium they make up the Tunica mucosa. I don't really see much of a muscularis mucosa here. I think there's probably a little bit potentially of it here, but that could just be the muscle associated with the wall of this blood vessel here. So I'm not going to make any guesses as to where the muscularis mucosa is. Again, doesn't seem, the muscularis mucosa is not very prominent in the earlier portions of the respiratory tract, so it doesn't need to be. So it tends to be more of a spiral earlier on. So in the trachea and some of the larger bronchi, it's more spiral in terms of its arrangement, and so you're likely to see a few sections through a bit of smooth muscle periodically, but you're not going to see a complete layer. As you go deeper, you're going to see much more of a continuous layer of smooth muscle and a much more prominent muscularis mucosa as you get into some of the smaller bronchi and the bronchioles. In this case here, we're looking at the trachea, so we're not expecting to see much of a muscularis mucosa. But beyond this tunica mucosa, what we have is the tunica submucosa, which contains quite a few blood vessels in here. And then beyond that is where we have the Tunica Adventitia, which begins with the Highland Cartilage. And so in this cartilage, again, we have a fairly basophilic matrix material and fairly well separated nuclei here. So we're seeing lots of chondrocytes here. There's a little bit of darker staining around some of them, showing that we have some isogenic groups in here. And then at the edge here is the perichondrium, where you would find some chondroblasts. And on the other side again, we have a perichondrium where you would find some chondroblasts. And again, further away, you would find some fibroblasts and so on. And some of the cells out here at the outer edge is smooth muscle. That's going to be continuous with that trachealis muscle that we just looked at before. Speaking of which, let's maybe move down to that trachealis muscle now. Take a closer look. Here it is. Okay, so here's a trachealis muscle that's going to be connecting the two ends of that cartilage. This is at the back of the trachea. Okay. Now, let me just get a closer view of this epithelium just to convince you that we do have cilia on the surface. Let's zoom into 1000x. Bump up the contrast a little bit. Too much, maybe. Okay. So here we can see that we can see individual fibers. So they're fairly long, and you can see individual fibers coming up. So we're seeing fairly clear that we have cilia here. And again, we can see multiple layers of nuclei here. And just below that, we have kind of this granular appearance. Some of the cells here. What we're looking at here are capillaries and red blood cells passing through the capillaries. So again, this is the functional part. So we've got a lot of fairly large network of capillary beds underneath that epithelium. That's what you're seeing here. Okay, so let's stop here. We'll pick it up with another video.